Now we are going to talk about the ABCs of behavior. The ABCs of behavior. The antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. Antecedents. Antecedents are discussing or observing or is the thing that is going on right before the behavior occurs. We may ask who, what, when, where, sometimes how, but we are definitely not going to ask why. Why would refer to the function of the behavior, and this will be addressed later. When using ABCs, we are not predicting the function. We are only recording the observation without bias. This will help us to determine the function. Remember, we don't want to have any preconceived notions about why the behavior may be occurring. We are only objectively recording what actually happened. ABA does have methods to discuss other types of things that may be in the antecedent realm, such as situations that may actually increase behavior or may lead to more behavior. These are known as establishing operations or motivating operations, and we'll talk about those more at a different time in this curriculum. For right now, however, understand that an antecedent is what is going on right before the behavior occurs. You may also want to think of it like a trigger for the behavior. Environment influences behavior. We can control the environment of the person in order to influence their behavior. We control both the antecedents and the consequences. The consequences are what come right after the behavior. A stronger method of controlling behavior is to control consequences. Antecedents come before the behavior of the individual, giving an instruction, a previous activity, an alarm clock going off, the presence or absence of a person or a thing or something in the environment can all be antecedents for a behavior. Again, antecedents come before the behavior of the child. Controlling antecedents is one way to influence behavior. It is not the strongest method of influencing behavior. So what is a behavior? A behavior is anything a person can say or do that can be witnessed by another person. Let's talk about covert versus overt behaviors. Behavior analysis has determined that we don't have to worry about covert behaviors. A covert behavior is a behavior that you cannot see. And when we say we don't have to worry about it, the better way to put it is we don't really have to emphasize it. We don't emphasize it. Because it's something we can't see. It's something we can't observe. An example of a covert behavior would be daydreaming. We cannot see it. We can't observe it. So we're not going to focus on that. But it does turn out that all behavior is influenced and changed and shaped by the environment. Behavior follows specific patterns or natural laws. If we can control the environment, we can control or influence the behavior. So, is it a behavior? Reading a book, putting on shoes, asking for a cookie, drinking water, pointing at a cat and saying cat, thinking. Well, reading a book is a behavior. It is something that we can see the person doing. Putting on shoes. That is something we can see, observe the person doing. Likewise, asking for a cookie, drinking water, and pointing at a cat are all things we can see and observe and describe. Thinking and daydreaming are both, they may be behaviors, but they are covert behaviors. Okay, covert again is something you can't see. The first ones, reading a book, putting on shoes, asking for a cookie, drinking water, and pointing at a cat and saying cat are all overt behaviors. Remember, overt behaviors are behaviors that we can see. They are observable. Covert behaviors. Thinking is a behavior, but since it cannot be witnessed by another person, we exclude it from consideration for behavior intervention plans or what we're going to be doing in skill acquisition. Doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just that we cannot really work on it in a way that could be beneficial for that patient. Instead, we're going to use environmental manipulation to influence behavior that we can both see and assess. Let's talk about measuring behavior now. We can measure overt behaviors. Remember, overt is something that we can see. Let's talk about frequency, duration, intensity, and latency. The frequency of a behavior is simply the number of times it's happened. A frequency count would be like counting how many times someone touches their head, punches a wall, etc., etc. A duration measure would be a measure of how long a behavior lasted. So if a person is tantruming, we might take a duration measure to see how long the tantrum is. Intensity is how strong a behavior is. This may also be known as magnitude. Did the person have a really bad tantrum? Was it very intense? Or was it just a small little tantrum where the person cried for a few minutes and didn't get very loud or anything? That could be like an intensity measure. And latency is how long between giving the instruction and the person actually engaging in the behavior. So if I tell my daughter to put her shoes on, and she puts her shoes on, she engaged in the behavior, but it took her 10 minutes, that would be a latency issue. The latency from my instruction to her doing the behavior was 10 minutes. We tend to use frequency with behaviors that have a very clear and observable beginning-end and are occurring at rates that we can actually mark down. If a behavior is occurring at very high rates, where it would be really difficult to count each individual instance, we may use duration to say how long the behavior is lasting. Now we get to consequences. A consequence immediately follows a behavior. A praise, a smile, some sort of toy, some sort of tangible item, something that follows the behavior. A slap, a shock, a scream could be bad consequences, right? The point, though, in ABA is that consequences is a neutral term. It is neither bad nor good. It is just what follows a behavior. So when a behavior analyst says consequence, we're not saying it's a bad or good thing. We're just saying what followed the behavior. We know that certain consequences can increase or decrease the likelihood of that behavior that they follow. In other words, we know that what follows the behavior can increase or decrease it. There are three types of consequences: reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. ABC during programming. For each individual that you work with, your success with them will rely on two things: what you say or do to set up the opportunity to learn, and what you say or do after the opportunity to learn. You control the before and after.